All right, thanks. Everybody hear me? Okay. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about pocket gophers today. Always a good idea, I think, to at least first start off by identifying the species we're talking about. So just to refamiliarize yourself, that's a gopher there. I'm sure you've all seen them before. Gophers, though, of course, spend very little time above ground, so we don't usually see them running around. Occasionally I do get a phone call from somebody saying, hey, I have gophers, they're running all over the place, and I have to remind them that that's probably not gophers, probably something else. But so oftentimes people do use the term gopher interchangeably, but here today we're talking specifically about pocket gophers. But since we don't always see them above ground, we're going to have to look for some form of sign to know they're present. And of course what we're usually going to be looking for are their mounts. This is a typical gopher mound, usually horseshoe shaped in appearance, with a plug towards the lower end of one side of the mound. This is in contrast to mole mounds, which oftentimes are confused with gophers. Mole mounds tend to be more conical or volcano-shaped in appearance, with a plug either right in the middle of the mound, or oftentimes you simply don't see the plug in the mound. But it is important that you can tell the difference between the two, because management for gophers and voles is quite a bit different. You know, gophers are rodents, they're going to feed directly on plants, they're going to cause a lot more damage from that perspective. Moles are insectivores, they're eating worms and grubs and things like that, so they don't usually damage the plants directly. And certainly their mounds cause some of the same problems that gopher mounds do, but as far as direct damage to the plant, it's quite a bit different. Gophers do certainly cause a lot of damage in a variety of different crops. This can include feeding on the taproots of plants, which is obviously one of the more common forms of damage. If you're dealing with tree crops and vines and things like that, they'll girdle them as well. They do eat above ground vegetation too. So lots of damage from gophers that we can see. But of course they damage irrigation systems. Anybody who's dealing with SDI knows that gopher damage to SDI is one of the biggest hurdles that individuals have. They like to chew on that, and then it becomes very costly and difficult to repair those. So lots of damage we can see from gophers. Damage varies depending upon the different cropping system that we're looking in. This is just some information that I collected a few years ago from a research project. Showed that losses might range anywhere from 5.3 to 8.8%. Of course, to no surprise to most people, alfalfa is usually the #1 crop that they cause damage in, but certainly they can be quite damaging in a lot of different systems. Now currently we do recommend that individuals utilize an integrated approach when it comes to managing gophers. An integrated approach is essentially just utilizing multiple techniques. You generally find much better success when you use multiple techniques than when you rely on any single one approach. So for example, you might start off with a bait application to initially try to knock down a gopher population, but that bait application oftentimes is not going to be enough. You might have to come back through with a follow-up approach to further reduce those populations. Trapping might be an example of a technique that you might use to come back in and target some of those remaining individuals. The important point to remember here, though, is that usually using some combination of tools like these will give you better success than just one of these tools by themselves. So for example, if you were doing a bait application, keep in mind, not all the gophers in a population may want to feed on that grain that you're putting down in there. And so repeatedly giving it to them isn't going to do you any more good. You've already gotten rid of the ones that want to feed on the grain. So if you want to get rid of some of the others, then maybe you need to come back through with traps or burrow fumigants or something along those lines. It's just important to remember that integrated approach is really important. So from this point on, I'm going to be talking about most of these tools singularly, because that's usually how we talk about these and when we talk about efficacy of different approaches and things like that. But just keep that in mind, combinations of tools are going to be better than just one of these tools by themselves. So as far as the different options we have for managing gophers, this gives you an idea of some of those that are available. Includes habitat modification, baiting, burrow fumigation, and trapping. These are all tools that can be relatively effective when it comes to managing pocket gophers. Exclusion can work on a very limited basis. If you're talking about trees or shrubs you're planting in your backyard, you can put wire baskets around the root system that can keep the gophers from chewing on them to a great extent. So it works great for a situation like that. usually too expensive to do that on a large scale. Same thing with raised flower beds. You can put gopher wire underneath, and that can keep the gophers from climbing up and chewing on flowers and vegetables and things like that. But again, it's not very practical on a large agricultural scale. Repellents have been looked at. I've been involved in studies where we've looked at repellents for gophers. There still is nothing out there really that has proven to be effective. Frightening devices such as vibrating stakes, things like that, have never proven effective either. And shooting is generally not a practical option for gophers, as you might suspect. Of course, one other tool that wasn't on that previous slide that we hear talk about some is biocontrol. And with biocontrol, we're talking about the use of natural predation to help control these pest populations. Probably owl boxes are the most common example of a biocontrol technique that oftentimes is mentioned or discussed for gopher control. Basic premise is that hopefully you can put up enough of these owl boxes, get barn owls to live in those owl boxes, and then hopefully they'll be able to pick off a substantial portion of that population and reduce those gopher densities. Problem is really at this point in time, there's no good data out there to suggest that these do work on any substantial scale. Problem is that gopher populations or other rodent populations tend to be high enough, and their reproductive capability is so great that the owls are simply not able to stay on top of that population. But I have been involved in some work here recently trying to look at the theoretical possibility of using these kind of predators to help control those populations, and at least based on some of our early modeling work, seems to suggest that if gopher populations are already at a fairly minimum level, then owls may be able to keep them at that relatively minimal level. But if you're dealing with a large gopher population, you're probably not going to be able to introduce these predators and expect them to be able to drop those populations down. But that's something we want to look at a little bit further.
Are there any methods to entice the owls to come to your boxes? Because I haven't had much luck in attracting.
Right. Yeah.
It stayed empty for years.
I'm probably the wrong person to ask on that because I've never dealt with owl boxes directly, but I can tell you that some locations, there's just not many barn owls around to begin with, and so then of course it's difficult to find enough of them to move in. That can be one limitation. There are ways to set up your owl boxes to maximize the likelihood that if there are owls present in that area, that they will occupy those boxes, and it has something to do with providing them enough shade if there is shade available, directing them in a certain direction so that sunlight doesn't come in and heat it up too much, etc. But I don't really know all those little tips and tools, to be honest, because it's not something I've ever dealt with before. But there is an A&R publication, I think it's a free publication, that talks a little bit about how to set those boxes up. You might be able to find some information there. And then some of the different commercial companies that actually sell them can oftentimes provide helpful pointers on ways to increase the likelihood. But it doesn't matter how good you are at it, you're never going to get 100% occupancy of those boxes anyways. You're just looking to try to get as much as you can out of it. Another one that I sometimes get questions on are gopher snakes, but in this case, remember, gopher snakes are snakes, they're reptiles. So they're cold-blooded individuals. They're not going to feed very often. In fact, a gopher snake probably feeds only once every 3 weeks or so. So it's probably a little bit much to expect that they're going to be able to manage your populations for you. I'll let you hit the allow or deny button. Yeah. I don't want to destroy your
Yeah.
The next slide is going to be about habitat modification, so we can talk a little bit about that. In some cases, depending upon some of the different cropping systems you're working with, you might have cover crops in between different rows of vines and trees and things like that. And so in those situations, there are some plants you can get rid of to help reduce carrying capacity for gophers. But in other crops like alfalfa, where the crop itself is the preferred food source, there's not much you can do from a habitat modification perspective to reduce their desire to be there. But there are some other tools that we can use that kind of fall under this guise of habitat modification. One of these is deep ribbing. If you're dealing with a system in which you've already had extensive gopher tunneling throughout that field, and then you're going to take that field out of production, if you can go ahead and till that soil down to 1.5 feet or so, that destroys those old burrow systems. Basically gives you a clean slate in that field to start over with, so that you can hopefully stay on top of that gopher population, keep them from repopulating out into that area quite as rapidly. If you don't, you already probably have a network of tunnel systems out there, so that when you replant, gophers will be able to quickly reinvade back into the interiors of those fields, and that makes it more difficult to stay on top of them. So something like this can be a good way to help destroy some of those old burrow systems and get you started again. Another one that may fall to some extent in this category would be flood irrigation. Of course, I know it's difficult to utilize flood irrigation with water shortages that we have these days, but anytime you do have the capability of using flood irrigation, that is a tool that can be used to help reduce gopher populations in an area as well.
How deep are burrows generally?
It varies. They usually have two different networks of burrows. The top layer is usually anywhere from 4 to 10 inches deep or so. Depends on the soil type in a given area. Sometimes it's shallower, sometimes it's deeper. Then they also have a smaller network of tunnels that are a little bit deeper, maybe 1 foot to 1.5 feet deep. Those are some of their more permanent burrow systems or tunnel systems underneath those structures. Again, it varies though depending upon soil type. Sandier soils, they tend to be deeper, so it will vary. Of course, we do oftentimes have gophers present in an area and we need to get rid of them, and so for that we have to use some of these removal techniques, and trapping is one of the tools out there that can be used. There's a variety of different traps out there on the market. Some are these squeeze type box traps, some of them are more along the lines of these pincher style traps. All of them can work to some extent for sure, but there's likely some that work a little bit better than others, and that's where some of my work has been involved with over the last number of years. In particular, we've done a lot of work comparing these two traps. This is the Maccabee, probably the most commonly used trap in the state. I'm sure most of you have at least seen this trap at some point in time. Then we have a newer trap out there called the Gophinator. The Gophinator's been around for about 10 years, and early on it seemed to be working pretty well, so we set up some trials to test these two traps. And what we found is that the Gophinator trap actually was working better than the Maccabee. And it was working better because it was capturing these guys at a greater rate, basically the larger gophers out there in the population. And that's what this chart is illustrating here. Along the x-axis we have the different size classes for gophers, and along the y-axis we have capture rates for gophers. And we have this broken down by the two different trap types. The solid line is the Gophinator, the dashed line is the Maccabee. What you see is that for the smallest size class of gopher, we actually captured exactly the same number with both traps. So it didn't really matter for those small gophers. But as we got into the larger and larger individuals in the population, we started to capture proportionally more and more of them using the Gophinator trap. And in fact, this relationship was almost completely linear. Essentially what it meant is that for each size class up in gopher that we were catching about 25% more using the Gophinator. And that was for each size class up. So by the time we got out to this largest size class, we were still catching them with the Gophinator. We were no longer catching them at all with the Maccabee. And it is important that we can get these larger individuals out there because they're responsible for a lot of the reproduction that occurs in a population. So it's important that we do remove those individuals. So the Gophinator, I think, is a really good trap. It's a trap that I've used for all of my studies since then. I think it's one of the best options you have. Lots of other questions we oftentimes get about trapping for gophers. Are there tools, tips, techniques that we can employ to increase our likelihood of catching gophers? And so that's where some of these other studies have kicked in. One of the big questions we always got is it important to cover those trap sets up after you put the traps out there, or can you leave those trap sets open? So we set up that study to look at that, and essentially what we found is that it didn't actually make a whole lot of difference either way. We did capture slightly more individuals using covered trap sets during the hottest times of year. Basically, if it's 80, 85 degrees or above, we started to capture slightly more using covered trap sets. But the slight increase in efficiency that we had was actually offset by the amount of time it took to cover and uncover those trap sets to come back and check them, basically. To the point where we were actually catching the same number per day, regardless of whether or not we were covering or uncovering those trap sets. And as we moved into cooler times of year, such as this time of year, which is a great time of year to be using trapping for gophers, we're actually starting to capture slightly more using these uncovered trap sets. So for my purposes, when I'm out there trapping over large areas, I generally just leave the trap sets uncovered. It saves me a lot of time. It's a lot easier. I don't have to worry about all that covering and uncovering process. Get questions about attractants too. Are there attractants that we can use to increase the likelihood of capturing gophers? The short answer is no, at least not based on the work that we've done. We've looked at a variety of different attractants and we found nothing that actually substantially increased capture efficiency. And then human scent is another one. Sometimes people are concerned whether or not they have to exclude human scent from that trap site, from the trap itself. Do I always have to wear gloves, etc.? And the short answer there is no as well. There is absolutely no impact of human scent on capturing gophers. They're actually pretty easy animals to catch relative to a lot of the other critters that are out there. And of course, we still haven't answered the question of how efficacious can trapping be, and in this case, the answer is highly efficacious. We've looked at it in a variety of different cropping systems, including wine grapes and alfalfa. And what we found in both of those systems, we're looking at about 92 to 93% removal rates after 2 trapping sessions through a field. So it is a very efficacious tool, one of the best tools we have. The second point I want to drive home from this particular slide is this comparison between the tan bars and the red bars here. The tan bars represent our efficacy after the first trapping session. The red bars represent efficacy after a second trapping session. You see that after the first session, we're looking at about 65% roughly efficacy, and then of course 92, 93% efficacy after the second session. This is really important to remember. When it comes to gophers, for us to be able to remove gophers from the population, we have to be able to target them in their burrow system. So it doesn't matter if we're using bait, trapping, or burrow fumigants. In all cases, we still have to get that treatment into the burrow system. For us to find the burrow systems, that means we have to see the mounds and then be able to find the tunnel systems from there. Well, gophers do not always constantly create new mounds. Sometimes it might be a week or 10 days in between mounding events. And so if we go out there one time, there's a good probability we're going to miss some of those individuals in the population simply because we didn't know that they were out there in the field. And in fact, a previous study done years ago showed that 20 to 25% of the gophers in the population will be missed the first time you go through it. So for gophers, you really kind of have to go through that field a second time, preferably somewhere around 7 to 10 days apart, to maximize the likelihood that you're going to encounter all or almost all the gophers present in a field. So it does mean a larger commitment to getting rid of gophers as opposed to some of the other species like voles and ground squirrels, where we can broadcast bait out there. We can bring them up to our treatment type. We can't do that with gophers. We have to take the treatment to them. So it makes it a little bit more challenging from that perspective. So obviously, in addition to trapping, we also have baits that can be used to manage gophers. With baits, we're talking about rodenticides. There's several different products out there. They include the first generation anticoagulants, such as difastone and chlorphasnone. And then we also have acute toxicants, such as zinc phosphide and strychnine. Like I said, all these products are available. It's important to remember, though, that these products may or may not be restricted use products, depending upon how you're using them, where you're using them, etc. Generally speaking, though, these days, they're almost always restricted use products if you're using them in agricultural settings. The only times they're usually not restricted use is if a homeowner is applying them for treating gophers in your backyard. Of these rodenticides, strychnine has always historically been the most effective of the products. The zinc phosphide and anticoagulant products usually haven't worked quite as well. As far as techniques, there are 3 techniques. One is a funnel and spoon method, where you poke a hole into the tunnel system, spoon the appropriate amount of bait into the burrow system or tunnel system, and move on. That works great if you got 1 or 2 burrow systems to treat, but if you got a whole field to treat, that's going to be way too time consuming. In those situations, a lot of times people will use one of these all-in-one probe and bait dispensers, which allow you to probe into the tunnel system, crank the lever, it deposits a preset amount of bait directly into that tunnel system, you plug it up and move on. Or if you're dealing with larger acreage, of course, we do have these burrow builders as well, which create an artificial burrow and deposit set bait at intervals within that burrow system. Efficacy for these burrow builders, though, tends to be spotty. Sometimes it works really well for people, sometimes it doesn't work very well at all. You're really depending upon the gopher being able to find that tunnel system, travel down it, and consume that bait. And so sometimes it doesn't always work all that well. Now, as I mentioned, strychnine has always historically been the most effective of the rodenticides that we have for gophers, but anybody who's tried to get strychnine in the last few years knows that it's getting more and more difficult to find. Basically, there's a shortage of strychnine coming into the U.S., and so there's not near as much of that bait available. So some colleagues of mine here a few years ago decided, well, if it's getting tough to find strychnine, let's see how effective some of these alternative products are. And so that's where this study came up. We basically tested 2 of the chlorofacilin, diphacinone, and zinc phosphide products that are currently registered for gophers, and we found that unfortunately none of those products were working well. We had at best 50% efficacy for these products. And from a lab study, by the way, this is a lab study, for a lab study we expect to see at least 80% efficacy to consider that a very efficacious tool. And we certainly weren't meeting that threshold, so that was a little disconcerting. But when we looked at the strychnine products, we also saw that we were only getting 50 to 60% efficacy, and so that was below what we wanted to see as well. However, when we broke this study down by population, we started to see very distinct differences. We collected gophers from a vineyard in Santa Rosa and then a site in Palo or San Diego County as well. And for that Santa Rosa site, we had 100% efficacy when using strychnine. For the other site, we only had 10% efficacy. So this is a huge disparity in efficacy for gophers collected from 2 different sites. We could actually explain this difference. It's been known for many years that gophers can develop a resistance to strychnine if repeatedly used over time. And at this Palo site, they had been using strychnine over and over for many years, and that population had now built up a resistance to strychnine. The Santa Rosa site, they had not been using strychnine, and it still worked great. So I think the take-home message here is that strychnine still can be a very effective tool when it comes to managing gophers, but it should be just one tool of an integrated approach for managing them. If you could repeatedly use it over and over again and don't incorporate other techniques, you're going to lose it because they're going to develop resistance to that product. Nonetheless, even though we've been able to show that strychnine still works, that didn't solve our initial question, our initial problem, which was if we can't get a hold of strychnine, what else can we use? So we started to look at some other products that are not currently registered for gopher control, such as bromethalin and cholecalciferol, but neither of these products were working well for gophers. We had 0% for bromethalin, 40% for cholecalciferol. But then in talking to some colleagues down in New Zealand, they've been looking at some combinations of cholecalciferol plus anticoagulants. Basically, the anticoagulant acts as a synergist. It increases the potency of the cholecalciferol while allowing you to use lower concentrations of both of those products, which is important with cholecalciferol because it has a taste that rodents don't always like. So if you can lower that concentration, it increases the likelihood that they'll consume that product. And what we found is that with these combination baits, we actually were getting very good efficacy, 80 to 100% for several of these different combination products. So we thought that was worth taking out to field to see how effective they were in a more realistic setting. And sure enough, these products were all working great in a field setting as well. We had anywhere from 75 to about 85% efficacy when using these combination baits. So these do seem to be good alternatives to strychnine for use for gopher control. Of course, the problem is that none of these are currently registered. We're hoping to get somebody to take this registration process on here in the near future so that maybe we'll have this tool available to us. Incidentally, though, we did compare it against strychnine, and strychnine was still the most effective of the products, even when compared to some of these combination baits. We actually had 100% removal with strychnine across 3 different sites. So the strychnine was still working very well. And then we do have burrow fumigants that can be used for gopher control too. Of course, with fumigants, we're talking about the use of toxic gases in burrow systems. These work best when soil moisture is high. Here in California, most of that precipitation, of course, falls in winter through early spring. So that's the best time to use these fumigants. You can use them later in the year if you're irrigating enough. So keep that in mind. They can be a tool later in the year, but certainly this time of year is a great time to be using them. Just remember, fumigants should not be used in or around buildings, and there are restrictions as to how close you can be to a building to use these products. So keep that in mind, because they're a real hazard to people, pets, livestock, etc., if they're used too close to buildings. Historically, we've had 2 fumigants available for use. These are gas cartridges and aluminum phosphide. The gas cartridges, even though they're marketed for gophers, do not work well for gophers. We really don't recommend their use. They do work relatively well for ground squirrels, so if you have ground squirrel problems, they can work in that situation. Aluminum phosphide, though, phostoxin, fumitoxin, lumicide, this is a product that works quite well for gophers. 90 to 100% efficacy based on some studies when looking at the use of aluminum phosphide. It, however, is also the most highly restrictive of all the products we have for gopher control. So there's a few more steps, a few more hoops you have to jump through to be able to use it. But if you're somebody who continuously has problems with gophers, it's a great tool to have. More recently, we have a newer fumigation option available to us, and that's the use of pressurized exhaust machines. These include the perk machine, the cheetah rodent control machine, and then there's another device called the Gopher X. The perk machine's been around for the longest, and it's designed for gopher control. One of the benefits for it is that it allows you to use multiple hoses and probes to treat multiple burrow systems at once. So theoretically, you can move through a field more rapidly if using one of these devices. The cheetah rodent control machine is really designed more for ground squirrels, and so we don't usually discuss it too much for gopher control. The Gopher X is pretty new. We haven't tested it, so I don't have a lot of information on it right now, but I do have some information to provide on the perk machine as far as efficacy is concerned. A colleague of mine, Steve Orloff, who's a farm advisor and county director up in Siskiyou and Modoc counties, did some of the initial work with the perk machine. He found efficacy of around 56% for this device. We've done some more extensive testing since then, and right now it seems like we're floating somewhere around a 65% range for efficacy. So usually we want to see 70% to consider it a pretty efficacious tool. We're a little bit below that level, but I think it's still high enough that we can consider this a somewhat useful tool. And it does allow you to move through fields more rapidly, and I have some data I'm not going to be able to show today just due to time constraints, but basically we're able to remove as many or even slightly more gophers on a per day basis, even though we have lower efficacy with this device compared to things like aluminum phosphide and gas trapping, simply because we're able to treat multiple burrow systems at once. So there are some potential benefits, I think, to the perk machine, but it's not quite as effective as some of the other tools, which is what this last slide is showing you. This is some data where we did some head-to-head comparisons across 9 different fields for the perk machine, aluminum phosphide, and trapping. And what we found is that aluminum phosphide and trapping were both essentially equally effective at removing gophers from an area. So they are both highly effective tools. Perk machine was a little bit lower on efficacy, but again, on a per gopher per day or number of gophers per day basis, it was still removing about the same number of individuals as these other approaches. Incidentally, we did go through a third time with trapping just to see if we could completely remove gophers from a field, and sure enough, in 2 of the 3 sites, we did completely remove gophers from a field using trapping. So it really is a very efficacious tool, and I think probably one of the 2 best tools out there for gopher control. That'd be trapping and aluminum phosphide, and strychnine too. I would incorporate strychnine. So that's my talk today. Incidentally, this is some work. This is 1 day's worth of trapping over 5 acres. We pulled off over 60 to 65 gophers per acre in this particular vineyard site. So if you think you have a bad gopher problem, it's probably not quite as bad as that one at least. Does anybody have some questions? I don't know what we're talking
We got
about.
like 4 minutes for questions.
So when you were talking about the resistance to strychnine in that gopher population, was that a heritable resistance or?
So that's not very well understood, but I would venture to say no, it's not an inheritable process because, and again, this wasn't explored in any great detail, but it seems to be almost more of Somewhat of a tolerance buildup to it, but also a behavioral avoidance issue. What happens is that some of the gophers seem to learn that they can eat sublethal doses of the strychnine and it won't kill them. And in fact, if they eat sublethal doses, it somewhat acts like a narcotic to the gopher. So they continually come back and eat small amounts at a time. And so if you look at some of these lab studies, after 20 days, which strychnine should kill them in a day or two, they've eaten many, many grams, like 20 or 30 grams of this stuff. They just eat a little bit of it at a time every day, and it doesn't kill them. But then some colleagues of mine years ago kind of repeated this study. They then took the gophers off the strychnine, waited a few months, and then fed it to them again. And then some of them ate a larger dose of it, within a day. So there can be, perhaps, they may lose that to some extent over time, but still based on a lot of the field trials and actual implementation by farmers out there, they still see that loss of strychnine over time if they use it too much. So I would suggest that if you waited 5 or 6 or 7 years, probably then it's going to have worked its way through the system and you could use it again. But probably for at least a year or two, and if not more like 3 or 4, you might see that loss of efficacy.
So can you use that ZP-coated wheat basically the same way you use strychnine-coated millet?
Yeah, it's used in the same way. The efficacy just hasn't been as good. The thing about zinc phosphide is that results tend to be highly unpredictable. So sometimes you actually do get pretty good kill with zinc phosphide. But then the next time you might use it and get very low kill, like 5 or 10%, it might be really low. Zinc phosphide has a very distinctive odor and a very distinctive taste to it that the animals don't always necessarily take to. So they may not want to eat it to begin with just because of that. Or they may eat very small amounts of it, which will be enough to cause them to get sick. But then when they get sick, they know they got sick from eating this weird food because I never had that before. And then they won't eat it again. And they might live for 3 or 4 years in some cases. And so it takes a while to work its way through that system.
I thought you said a couple years ago, 6 years ago, one of these phosphides they would take back into their breeding den.
That was aluminum phosphide.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the fumigant, the tablets.
Right.
Yeah. A colleague of mine years ago found when they were excavating burrow systems after they had treated it, they'd find these tablets back in some of their nesting chambers. So they think they might actually be somewhat attracted to that particular product. For whatever reason, the zinc phosphide, maybe it's more of a taste issue than it is an odor issue. I'm not really sure because they're not going to be feeding on the aluminum phosphide tablets. But for whatever reason, they seem to be taking that stuff back into the burrow systems. But the zinc phosphide, they just don't want to eat. And, there's also the question of carrier. Do they like the wheat versus milo versus oats versus, some kind of alfalfa pellet, et cetera, too. So, a lot of these different baits, they may have the same active ingredient, but different carriers, and that carrier might influence the efficacy, too. And my guess is wheat is not one of the better carriers. Milo usually tests pretty good, though.
Do you have thoughts on timing and seasonality of gopher trapping? So if you're going to focus your efforts at a certain time and really be after it,
Yeah.
and thinking about the gaps between going after them.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing about gophers is they are active year-round, so you can treat them year-round, as opposed to ground squirrels, where they hibernate certain times of the year. So there are some limitations there for ground squirrels. For gophers, you can treat year-round, but the best time is usually from winter through early spring is probably the best time to target your control efforts for gophers. And that's for a couple of reasons. Number one, you start to see the lowest population densities at that time. Natural mortality kicks in and they haven't had a lot of reproduction yet. First reproductive pulse is usually around early spring, late winter, somewhere through there. So if you can get them before that reproductive pulse, then you have fewer individuals out there to treat. But secondly, and I would argue probably even more importantly, is the fact that we're getting this rainfall. It makes the ground softer, so they mound more frequently. It's easier to find them. It's easier for us to probe and find the tunnel systems. It's easier for us to dig a hole, set traps, put bait in the ground, etc. So this really is probably the best time of year to be managing gophers. When you get into the middle of summer where it's hot and the soil is really dry, it's really tough to probe. It's really tough to dig and to do some of that work. So that's really not the best time of year to manage gophers.
So one more quick question, then we'll And you can talk.
How many aflatoxin do you usually put in?
So the label says 2 to 4 tablets per application. We're usually trying to treat 1 to 2 times per burrow system, depending upon how big the burrow system is. So usually we base the number of tablets on how wet it is. So it's super wet out here right now, so 2 tablets per application is probably enough. When it gets a little bit drier, but still not too dry to treat, then you might go to the 4 tablets. So it's a bit of a guessing game to some extent, but you're looking at 2 to 4 tablets per application and probably up to 2 applications per burrow system. Yeah. All right, thank you.